Okay, today I'm going to go through creating a TypeScript bot from scratch. I haven't rigorously prepared this, so some things may go wrong. I may get stuck myself, but we'll hopefully get through it smoothly enough and you'll see that it's not that hard. So let's get started. Right, so I'm going to assume we've got an OpenChat instance running locally. Again, as I've said before, there'll be a dedicated video on that, or you can just look at the OpenChat README in the repo, and it should give you enough information to get started with that. But what we haven't got yet is a bot, so that's what we're going to try to create today. Let's just dive straight into the development environment. I hope you can see this okay. I'm going to create a new directory, call it bot. And we're going to want to, I'm going to use Express.js. But I'm going to use TypeScript because that's going to help us when it comes to understanding the types. I'm just going to initialize a project in here. And then I'm going to install a couple of things. I'm going to install Express. And we're going to install TypeScript. So first thing I'm trying to do here is just get a node server up and running, just so we can start from that blank canvas. Initialize TypeScript, and then let's just have a look at the tsconfig file that's created for us. This just shows us how TypeScript's going to behave. I need to open this project. Just a basic config there. Let's create a source directory so that we've got somewhere to put our code. And I'm just going to copy and paste a bog standard basic server into this. Why is it not letting me create a file? Okay, server ts, it's a TypeScript. So we're going to import Express, create the Express app, have it run on port 3000 or whatever's in the environment variable, and then just handle the root level path and ping back hello. That's our hello world. And we're going to add some commands in here. To get our server running. Okay. Now, if we run this, we should hopefully we should have a server running on localhost 3000. So we create a new tab just to see that that's running. Whoops. Okay, so we can see we've got our server running now. One other thing I would like to do is make sure that we can get this to restart whenever we change the code. So I'm going to install a nodemon as well. Let's close that down for a sec. Nodemon, and then we need to change the dev script so that it runs node using nodemon. Oops, went to do npm run dev. Okay, so that we can just leave that running now, and hopefully that's going to restart itself every time we change any of the code. Right, that's our kind of baseline. Next, we're going to have a look at the README and see what we need to do. Because nothing beats a bit of dog fooding. So if this doesn't work for me, then it won't work for you. So we'll try it. So the first thing we need to do is install the Typescript bot SDK, and I can immediately see that that is actually incorrect. There's our first gotcha. That is an old library, so we'll make a note to change that. What we actually want to install is this one. Oh no, it is correct. I stand corrected. Right. That's going to give us the tools that we need to help us deal with JWTs and API keys and all that sort of good stuff. And that has restarted successfully, which is good. Let's go back to our README, see what the next step is. Right. Okay. When we run a command, then the first thing it's going to do, we're gonna write a command bot here. So we need to implement the route that's going to handle the commands. We've got a couple of special routes we need to handle. We need to handle a route to return our schema, and we need to handle a route to handle commands that are sent to our bot. So at the moment we've just got the top level route that's going to respond to our hello world. So let's deal with the schema first. Let's get that set up. So instead of responding with hello world here, we're going to change this to return our schema. Okay, so we need to write an Express.js handler to return that schema. Let's put that in a directory called handlers. That doesn't exist yet. New file. So this is going to be a Express.js request handler, so we're going to need request and response from Express. And we're going to actually don't need the request, but we'll put it in there just for the sake of it. And we just want to return some JSON. Now, what goes in here, it needs to conform to the schema definition that is defined within the bot repo here, you can see. So this is expressed in terms of JSON schema. There are tools you can use to visualize this, make it a bit easier to see what's going on, but I'm not going to go too much into that, but we'll hopefully get an understanding of it as we fill in the details. So we could specify an autonomous config here. As we can see from the schema, the autonomous config is one of the top level properties in the schema, but it is, in terms of which properties are required, then we either require an autonomous config or at least one command. So in our case, we're going to specify commands rather than autonomous config. We will put a description in to the test bot, and we're going to have an array of commands. And let's just start very simple, and we'll have a ping command. Command needs to be given a default role. And I guess in this case, we want the default role to be anyone, any participant. Give it a description. Say Pong. The command needs to express what permissions it requires. Now, this is the first time we're going to need to use the SDK because permissions are encoded in a slightly tricky way, so we need some support from the SDK to help us do that encoding. We do that by using this permissions static function encode permissions. Okay, so we've got to fill in chat permissions. We don't need any chat permissions. Community permissions, we don't need any community permissions, and message permissions. We're just going to need the permission to send a text message, that's all. And we could also express what params our command needs. In this case, our command does not need any params. All right, so that is probably about as minimal a schema as we can get away with. Why does it not like that? Okay. Let's just double check in on what that now looks like when we call localhost cannot be reached. Why is that? Okay. Server is running on localhost 3000. And there's our schema. Okay. Now, officially we have a running bot. If we were to try to register this bot, we would come up against a problem immediately. We need a principal. We don't have a principal. So we do need that. Okay, so let's generate one. And we can do that by following the instructions in the README. Run that command and we can see what we've got. We've got private key.pem. So let's just take a look at that inside our why can't I see that? Never mind. Okay. So that's what our private key looks like. This part of it here. Copy that. And we're going to create a .env file so that we can inject this into the environment. Identity private equals. I'm just gonna get this all onto one line. All right. Now, we still can't really register this bot yet because we don't know what principal this private key is going to result in. The easiest way to find that out is to get a bit further in our setup. So we've got our schema function now. We now need to also support the execute command endpoint. So let's stop that in. Execute command. Okay, and we'll create a handler for that as well. And let's just copy this one and cut out the bits we don't need. Now, when our command crashed our server there, when our command runs, it's going to need to tell the bot SDK what's going on. We're gonna give it the JWT token that comes from the OpenChat front end, and it's going to set up a bot client for us to use for the remainder of the lifespan of the command. Let's fill this in first. So we want that to have happened before we run our execute command handler, and the way we're going to go about doing that is probably using a middleware. So fairly idiomatic thing to do in Express.js. And we're going to want to, there's a thing called a bot client factory within the SDK, and that's going to help us create bot clients from an incoming command request. So what we want to do first is to create an instance of this factory so that we can pass it into the middleware we create. We can see that's going to get pulled in from the SDK library, and we can see from the autocomplete that this requires a bot client config, and this comprises various bits and pieces that we're going to get from the environment. If we have a little look at what that bot client type looks like, we can see we need an open storage canister ID, and that is to deal with uploading kind of media data. We need the IC host to tell it what environment we're in, essentially, whether we're talking to mainnet or some sort of testnet. We need that identity private key that we placed in our environment file before. And we also need the OpenChat public key. So far we've only got one of these things. We've got the identity private key, so we're going to need to do a little bit more work to figure out where the rest of these things come from. So we can fill in identity private key. We're going to get that from process.env. We called it identity private. Whoops, that's annoying. We're going to have to tell Typescript we know what we're doing here by saying that's not going to be null. So where do these other things come from? If we look in the README, it's going to tell us that these things, well, actually, does it tell us? It tells us what they are, doesn't tell us where we can get them. Where you can get them is from inside your running instance of OpenChat. Go into your user profile, scroll down to the advanced section and hit bot config. Okay, these are the remaining 3 pieces of information we need. Let's copy those one by one. The OpenChat public key first. We're going to put all of these in the environment file. Let's call this OC public. Again, we need to single lineify this. Next thing will be the open storage index canister. Let's call that and then we need IC host close that. And that's just where my local instance of IC is running. All right. So now we can fill in the rest of these details. Apologies for my inability to type. Identity. No, we've done that one. OpenChat public key process env.oc public. And last but not least, storage index canister. Right. Okay, so that's our bot client factory, and let's just see what a bot client factory is. It provides a few methods. The one we're interested in here is to create a bot client from a command JWT, because that's what we're going to get from the front end ultimately in this use case. If we were using API keys for autonomous mode or for integration mode, we would want to use one of the other factory methods. So we're going to create a middleware function to create our bot client, and we're going to then attach it to a request. So I'm just going to inline this here. So we want to create command bot client. We're going to pass it the factory, and it's going to, no, it's a middleware, it's not going to return anything. It's going to return a function request, and that's an Express.js request and a response, and then next, which is the next function in the middleware pipeline. Okay, so that's the basis of our middleware, and we can now plug that into our handler. Create command bot client factory. Okay, but let's need to make this do something. So we're going to try, always a good idea to assume the worst, so we'll try and get the JWT token from the request headers. And this comes through in a custom header called x.oc.jwt. We don't get a token. We'll throw a bad request. And we'll use a helper function from the SDK here to format this in a sensible way to help us understand what happened on the front end. That's a token not found. Okay. So we now want to create an instance of our client create client from command JWT. And pass in the token that we just obtained. We're just going to cast that as a string because the types are leaving some ambiguity there, but we happen to know it's a string, so we'll just gloss over that little white lie to the compiler. And now it's quite commonplace in Express.js for middleware to augment the request. So we'll just tag this client onto the request object. So we'll do request.botClient equals client, and that will allow us to then use that bot client further down the pipeline to do whatever we need to do. Unfortunately, the Express.js request object does not have a bot client property, so we're going to have to do a little bit more lying to the compiler. Let's see if we do we just need to okay, so we're just extending the Express.js request type with this extra property. We don't have a catch here, that's why that's complaining. Then if anything goes wrong, if it was a bad request error, then we'll send back an error in the 400 range. Otherwise, we'll just send a 500. Okay, and the one crucial thing we need to do is then call next in the middleware pipeline. Right, so let's just review what's happened here. We've added the execute command handler. We've created a middleware which will use the bot client factory to create an instance of the bot client, which will handle decoding and verifying the JWT that's come from the front end, and it will then pass it on to our execute command root handler, which currently does nothing. This we will now change to, in order to extract that bot client from the request, we need this to use our new extended type, which means we're going to have to put that somewhere we can import it. Let's just okay, and then we can do with bot client. All right, so we're getting there. Doesn't like that. We're not going to do that. Let's going to be a little bit more fiddling around. So We're going to need a little helper function here. This is the TypeScript tax. It will save our lives, but it is going to be a little bit fussy. So if we find that we get to our command handler and find that we don't have a bot client attached to our request, then that's obviously some sort of error that's gone wrong. Further up in the pipeline, we can just return an error. This does not seem happy for some reason. Could be something to do with my TS config. Let's just find out what it is. Right, back in business. Okay, so we don't want that to say schema in this case. We want it to say execute command. Right, so let's just have a little recap of where we are. We've got a Node.js server running. We've exposed the schema, very simple schema, exposing a single command. We've implemented an execute command handler. We've added a middleware to that handler, which is going to create an instance of the bot client. It's going to extract the OpenChat JWT from the custom header, and it's going to use the SDK to create a bot client for us. And it's going to attach it to the request. That's a kind of bootstrapping, and then we're going to pass that on to our execute command, and this is where we're actually going to handle our command. So at this point, we can be certain, we've got this guard function here, so we can be certain that we have a client attached. We can just do keep TypeScript happy. And that is going to be all the help we need to do this. So at this point, we can just log something out. Console log command name, for example. What have we got in our command name? Well, we can find that by looking at client.command name. So when we inject that JWT into this client. The client's going to verify the JWT and it's going to decode it, and it's going to present back all the information that's in there in a nice format for us. Notice that command name is actually string or undefined. That's because we can't be absolutely sure that our client was initialized with a credential that contains a command. So be defensive when you're using this. We will need to, be on our guard against all possibilities. But let's come back to that. So the next step then is to try to install this bot and see what happens. Actually, before we get to that, I can see in here that we have a little error saying IC host not provided. That means that our config isn't coming through, and that's because we have not installed .env. And we need to also make sure that is running. Okay, we've got .env installed and running now, and that error has gone away, and that means that the server has started correctly, and we can see that because we're initializing the SDK with that environment data, we can see that it's spitting out the principal that has been generated from that PEM file private key. And that's all we need now. We can now register our bot, hopefully. So we go into here, register bot. Let's give it a face. Let's enter that principal. Test bot. And it should be running on HTTP localhost 3000. Now, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see an error here. Let's just see if we can figure out why it doesn't like that. Okay, we can look in our dev console here and see that we're trying to fetch port 3000 from port 5001, and that has been blocked by a CORS policy. So this is because we're trying to load from a resource from one origin into a resource from another origin, so it doesn't like that. So we can fix that. We just need to, what do we need to do? We need to install CORS into our server. Let's do that. pm install cause. Go into our server. And import it. We need some types as well. Okay, that error's gone away. And now we just use that @use cause. Okay, and with luck, that will get rid of that error. But it didn't. Let's just see if it's the same error. Oh, it must have just been a little bit of lag. Okay, so that has now successfully loaded our schema. If we look at what's actually happening there in the network tab, we should be able to see that query to localhost, and there is our schema coming back. All right. So notice, like, we haven't actually implemented our handler yet, really. But OpenChat doesn't care. OpenChat just needs to know what it looks like. So we look at ping, we see everything's all there as we specified. So we can register it. Let's just close these dev tools because we don't really need that now. And now we should see the bot show up. There it is. Doesn't have any autonomous behavior configured for this, so it's just a matter of deciding which command permissions we want. If we don't give it any, we're not going to get very far, so we'll just leave that as it is. We'll hit install. Testbot added by me /ping. There it is. Of course, it doesn't work. The reason it doesn't work is because we haven't implemented it yet. Well, is that the reason it doesn't work? Let's see. Execute command has failed with a 404, and that is because we have used the wrong HTTP verb. We look in our server, we specified that execute command is a get endpoint, which is incorrect. It's a post endpoint. So let's try again with a post, see what happens. Okay, so that returned 200. It did receive the OC JWT correctly. So we're in fairly good shape. We can see that it console logged the command name ping. So in as much as we've implemented, it's working. So the next thing we need to do is actually make it say something to us, respond in a way that the OpenChat app is going to understand. So we know we have got a client. The quickest and easiest thing for us to do is to create a text message. And then once we've created that text message, we want to return it to the OpenChat front end and also send it to the OpenChat backend. The reason we do both is because we want the front end to get the feedback as quickly as possible. So we don't want to necessarily wait for the OpenChat backend to process this and for it to churn its way through the update loop. We just want to say what the result is as soon as we can. So we're going to create a message. Creating messages is an asynchronous process because sometimes it needs to do some async processing. An example would be an image message. It might need to upload the image bytes before it can create the message. So we're going to convert this whole thing to be an async function. That makes our life a little bit easier. We can then await creating a text message, and we do this via this client. Client create text message. And this is our final. We have this concept of messages being finalized or not. You may want to send a kind of placeholder message saying that your bot is thinking, in which case you would send a first message with its finalized property set to false, and then once the bot has finished processing and has its final answer, you would then send the same message with the finalized property set to true. In this case, this is our final say on the subject, so we're going to set finalized to true. So that's our message, and we need to send it. We're going to do two things. We're going to use the client to send this message to the back end. We'll just have a little catch statement on there in case anything goes wrong. Just console error. That's going to send that message to the OpenChat backend, where it will be processed and then become visible to every other user in the system. But to get the immediate feedback to the user who's actually using the command, we will also send back this message to the front end as well. And we do that using just a normal JSON response from Express, but we've got we need to make sure it's formatted correctly in such a way that OpenChat is going to understand it. So it's going to be just a blank object. We may or may not wish to return a message when we respond from our bot. In this case, we do. So we have a message property, and we simply set that the value of the message that we created, but we also convert it to a response. Right. This helper function here, toResponse, that helps us to format the message correctly in a way that the OpenChat front end is going to understand. We don't need that anymore. Well, let's see whether this works. Ping, pong. it does work. Hooray. And if we wanted to just see what that finalization concept looks like in action, if we set this to false, we could say thinking about ponging. So we do the exact same thing. We create this message thinking about ponging. We set that finalized to false. We send that message to the OpenChat backend. And respond with that to the front end. And then maybe, let's say 3 seconds later, create another message. Let's just copy and paste this stuff because it's basically exactly the same. This time we set finalized to true. So this is simulating the concept that the bot sends a placeholder message, thinks about it, does its job, which takes some time, and then sends its final updated message. Let's just see if that does what we expect. Keep a close eye on the messages. Sorry, that didn't work. Okay, we must have done something wrong there. What did we do wrong? Thinking about ponging. Pong. Okay, I guess that error must have been because our server was restarting. So that's basically it. There's a lot more we could say. There's a lot more capability in the in this bot client. I'm not going to go through all that here now because it would take too long, and this is already running to an hour. But what we will do is in the future, I'm going to do another video where I go through the TypeScript examples in the SDK and show you some of the different things that we can do other than the simple command handling that I've shown you here. But hopefully this shows that there is nothing up my sleeve and you can create this yourself from scratch in less than an hour and get something up and running that you can then build on. So hope this is useful, and as ever, give us a shout if you get stuck. Bye-bye.